How many of us have jokingly referred to stalking people on social media? It's a common term nowadays. But in truth, stalking is a very real crime. This is a case of 24-year-old Alice Ruggles, who was hounded by her ex-partner, Tremont Dillon, with tragic consequences. Alice Ruggles was the third child of maths teacher Mum Sue and Professor Dad Clive.
Alice was born on Christmas Eve. She's the third of 4 children, and it's quite hard to fit in as one of the middle children, but Alice certainly made her presence known. She was always very lively and dynamic.
She was the fun-loving one. She just got the most out of every situation. She was always laughing, she was always happy. And she always seemed to have this empathy for what you felt. So if you were feeling down, she'd come out with a little joke or do something funny.
That was my older sister, then me, then Alice, and my younger brother. So we used to go to Cornwall every year, and I've got very strong memories of playing on the beach and having barbecues.
And we'd arrive and it would be pretty chilly, and we'd all sort of put our toes in the water, but Alice would be straight out there up to her neck swimming, and be thinking, oh, if she gets into difficulty, I'm going to have to go in after her and it's much too cold.
Growing up in the village of Turlangton in Leicestershire, Alice had a strong bond with her parents.
I used to talk to her a lot if I was having issues about something or I was feeling down about something.
We just were really close and got on brilliantly. She was a fantastic daughter. She was one of my best friends.
After graduating from Northumbria University, Alice found her dream job in Newcastle.
She worked for Sky, and her job was as site coordinator. She introduced all the new people to the company and took people around, and she was a perfect person for that. She could make people feel at ease straight away. She just could talk to anybody, and that was her big skill. People skills was the thing that really defined her.
She was very square, is what she would call herself. She was always focused on doing the right thing at work, but at the same time as having a laugh and a joke. She would always bring out the goofy side of anybody that she actually spoke to.
Say
When?
Sports visitor came in and they had asked for volunteers to go up and do these tricks with footballs, and Alice was the first one up there with the ball, putting it behind her neck and doing a press-up in the middle of the call centre floor in front of every member of staff. She was always the life and soul of the party.
Boyfriends were the only area of Alice's life that weren't going so well. So when best friend Jen offered her a trip to Sri Lanka in October 2015, she jumped at the chance.
She wasn't originally supposed to come to Sri Lanka. It was a trip that I had booked with a previous boyfriend that we were then no longer together. And she was also going through quite a rough breakup. So we kind of saw it as like a Golden Girls liberation tour. It was probably one of the most fulfilling friendships I've ever had. I think you tend to get a lot of one-sided friendships in life, and that was never the case with Alice. She always gave as much as you did, and she always put in 100 times more effort than a normal person would. I think we bonded on a level that maybe a lot of people couldn't understand at the time. We were in a very similar place, so we went into the holiday expecting and needing it to just be easy and just have a laugh, and that's exactly what we did.
Early on in the trip, Alice was offered a much-needed confidence boost when one of Jen's male acquaintances commented on a photo she had posted on social media.
It was just us on the plane. We were sat pulling silly faces, and he said that she was beautiful. And obviously, that is exactly the type of thing that she needed, pick-me-up-wise.
Alice's admirer was Lance Corporal Tremont Dillon, known to his friends as Harry.
I went to uni with Harry. He was a best friend of one of my very good friends. We'd see each other at parties, but we weren't in the same friendship group. I trusted the opinion of my friend, and she always referred to him as a nice guy. So I think I just adopted that impression.
Military man Harry was a signaller with 2 Scots based at Glencorse Barracks in Midlothian. But at the time of his message, he was in Afghanistan.
He messaged me independently, and I was like, do you know what? If you want to talk to her, just open the line of communication. I told her at the time, so she knew it was coming. That's how they began speaking. There wasn't very much Wi-Fi, and we used to just sort of sit in the lobby trying to scrape Wi-Fi, and I'm fairly certain they were speaking every single time we were sat in the lobby.
Originally from India, Harry moved to the UK in 2010 when he was given the option of doing the final 2 years of his degree at Queen Margaret University near Edinburgh, after which he joined the army. On her return home, Alice and Harry were still in contact.
They started talking on the 1st of October, and by the 31st, they were in a relationship. They hadn't even met, so that in itself is shocking. I think everyone was a bit dubious about it. People were concerned, but ultimately everyone just wanted her to be happy, and she seemed really happy. From everything she told us, he seemed exactly like the type of person that she deserved and that she should be with.
I was surprised at how quickly they got on. My older daughter's in the military as well, so the fact he was a soldier was something to be proud of. They could send out gift boxes to people who were serving overseas. She was doing that for him and putting in chocolates and books and things that she thought he would like.
It was at this time that Jen and Alice went on a weekend break with friends.
We rented a cottage and we just dressed up as Disney princesses and essentially had our own Halloween celebration.
During this party, Alice became unusually preoccupied with messaging Harry.
At a cottage, Wi-Fi is limited. She would move furniture to sit in corners to message him. And if she couldn't get in contact with him, he would message me and ask if she could use my phone to speak to him. And she was getting quite distressed that he was getting very upset about not being able to speak to her. He was also making comments about how much she was drinking, but she was at a weekend away with her friends. I actually don't think I'd ever seen her cry. She cried 2, maybe 3 times that weekend, and I just had never seen her like that before.
Harry Dillon was a controlling person. He was that person before Alice met him, but she didn't know that. And he speeded things up very quickly. His control and that relationship was kind of committed before they physically set eyes on each other. Now that is some of the clear signs that Alice was going to have problems with Harry Dillon further down the line.
By Alice's birthday on Christmas Eve 2015, the couple still hadn't met in person, but a phone conversation with Harry once again managed to upset Alice.
His initial reason for calling was to say happy birthday, but somewhere in that conversation that they had, he said that they had had Victoria's Secret models to visit, and then went into great detail to describe how beautiful they were and that he was really enjoying them being there. And she was quite upset by it. This was maybe the first in a long line of instances where he tried to make her feel insecure about their relationship. But then when she would bring it up, he would act as if she was crazy.
Harry wasn't just instilling insecurities about their relationship, he also started attacking Alice's looks.
He commented on the size of her nose and the hair on her forearms. He gave her complexes about stuff that she wouldn't necessarily have had a complex about. He would also comment on the way that she dressed. Who are you trying to impress? He seemed to have an opinion on everything, and it was always quite negative.
He was sort of trying to persuade her that he loved her, but nobody else could ever love her.
It wasn't until January 2016, over 3 months after their first communications, that Harry and Alice finally met in person. And after spending a week in Edinburgh, Harry came to Newcastle.
We had arranged as a group with partners to all go out for some food so we could meet Harry. I was late and my boyfriend wanted to sit next to me, and all we had to do is kind of move one space around the table. It wasn't a big deal, but he wouldn't do it, so we had to physically move an extra chair and squeeze it into a small gap. It was very awkward. It wasn't necessary, and he was quite aggressive about it. There was a bit of an atmosphere. You could tell there was maybe a little bit of bickering going on between them, and they abruptly left. We didn't question it further, but it was awkward. It was weird.
Coming up, Harry and Alice's relationship hits the rocks.
She discovered that he'd been dating other people.
But his refusal to let go turns sinister.
It wasn't just your typical boyfriend struggling to detach themselves from you. This was next level stalking and harassment.
When 24-year-old Alice Ruggles was introduced to Lance Corporal Tremont Dillon, also known as Harry, via a friend on social media, she thought she'd found her Prince Charming. But even before they met in person, Harry's behaviour was both critical and controlling. They were eventually able to spend time together whilst Harry was on leave from his tour of Afghanistan, and friend Jen sensed an awkward atmosphere. Now, 3 months on, Harry was set to return from his posting abroad. But would things improve? Or was the worst yet to come? Alice's parents were yet to meet their daughter's new boyfriend, and now he was back in barracks. The opportunity finally arose.
The first time we actually met him was bank holiday weekend in 2016, and they came down for a couple of days to stay with us.
He was polite, he was reasonably attentive to Alice, and he said all the right things.
I was aware of the fact that he was telling me what he thought I wanted to hear as a father.
Sue and Clive had no reason to doubt Harry's intentions, especially as Alice hadn't disclosed to her parents his questionable behaviour towards her.
She did tell me a lot about him. Obviously, she missed out some things that I wish she hadn't, but that's what it's like. You don't tell your parents everything.
It wasn't long before Alice and Harry returned for another visit.
By the second weekend, you could sort of see cracks in the relationship. He wasn't really interested in Alice. He spent the entire weekend trying to buy a car. Even though we were trying to have a nice family weekend, he just talked obsessively about should he buy this car or that car and what did we think.
He spent about an hour or more on the phone just ignoring Alice, and she was getting quite upset about it.
It's not something that's a major alarm bell. I just felt he was a bit self-obsessed and a bit impolite, really.
But soon after, Sue noticed a couple of things that were of concern.
Alice said to me one day, "Oh, Harry says I'm not to speak to Jen anymore." And I questioned her and said, well, why not? And she said, "Oh, we had an argument about something. And Harry says I just need to keep away from people like that because they're toxic."
We had a disagreement and we would have fixed it and it would have been fine. It was actually the first argument we'd ever had, but he made it worse and he would say, "Don't text her. She's not a friend, don't do it." He was very clever. It was almost like he had a strategy. He knew exactly which friendships he needed to cut off in exactly which order so that we wouldn't speak to each other and kind of piece together what was going on.
Gradually over the next couple of months, she seemed to fall out with more friends.
In relationships, it's really important that an abuser isolates his victim, because by doing that, it means that they haven't got the support frameworks to remove themselves from the relationship. The more that they can cut off friendships, they can't go and talk about their problems, so they're not getting the reinforcement and help to get out of the relationship. And in that situation, your self-esteem is affected and it kind of chips away at the very fabric of your being, and it renders you feeling helpless.
Alice also fell out with her flatmates, which led her to move in with colleague Maxine.
I first met Harry when he came to the flat. He came across very gentlemanlike, but there was something just too gentlemanlike about him that got my back up. He almost would put on a Scottish accent so that he would try and relate to me. He was almost overly nice. It was very strange.
Alice now had a confidant in Maxine.
Alice confided in me quite a lot about our relationship. He was almost pitting away at her so that he was left with just bones, because inevitably that's what happened to Alice. Is she started to lose a lot of weight. She started to physically shake in front of you because of what he was doing and how he was treating her. She was a shell of who she used to be, and I watched it happen right in front of my eyes. It got to a certain point where I'd had enough, and I told Alice that, and I'd says, "Enough's enough, Alice. You're talking to me about abuse here."
And one particular revelation from Alice pushed Maxine to lay down the law.
Alice had went for a shower. Harry was very impatient to be using the toilet. He'd got to that point that he actually just opened the door and demanded Alice get out, and he didn't allow Alice to get the shampoo out her hair or even use a towel. He demanded Alice to stand with nothing on until he used the toilet. When Alice told me that, that's at the point where I'd says, "Alice, I don't want him in our house anymore." And she actually agreed with me at that point, and she was saying, "I know, understand now."
Despite this, Alice and Harry still joined the Ruggles family on their annual holiday to Cornwall in the summer of 2016, where they too noticed a change in Alice.
Alice was not herself on that holiday. She was definitely a bit subdued and a bit quieter and not as energetic as she normally was at all.
We did mention several times that there was something wrong with Alice and we needed to find out what it was. But she was never without him. And I sort of look back to it and I think, maybe that was deliberate from his point of view, that he didn't want her to be with the family and having a good time without him being there to monitor what's going on.
But Alice and Harry's days as a couple were now numbered.
The last time we saw Harry was when he and Alice drove off from that holiday. A few days later, she broke up with him. The reason for that was she discovered that he'd been dating other people.
Alice had received a message from a lady on social media to say that Harry had been trying to form a relationship with this lady and felt that it was right to tell Alice. So, of course, Alice was absolutely shocked that he could almost lead this double life.
And that was really what made Alice think, I'm not going to go out with this guy anymore because I can't believe anything he says. He's just a complete and utter liar. So that, as far as I was concerned, was the end of the relationship.
She messaged me asking to go for a coffee. She had texted me earlier in the day, specifically to say, if Harry messages you, don't tell him where we are. And I assumed it was more of the same. They were together and he didn't like that she was friends with me. She said, no, it's not that. We've broken up. He cheated on me. That shocked me.
But Harry wasn't going to let Alice go that easily.
When she ended it, all that control that he was trying to exert over her, make her dependent on him in the relationship, suddenly he's lost that. And that's when he started bombarding her with messages on social media, phone calls, just hundreds and hundreds of messages, a mixture of the emotional blackmail and things that were beginning to get quite threatening.
Alice, please. Please, I can't do it.
She said, Harry's just being an absolute pain. He just won't leave me alone. He said to her that he would broadcast compromising photographs on Facebook. That was one of the things that made her continue to try and bargain with him in the early stages, rather than just say, no, I'm having nothing more to do with it. And then she decided that she was not going to respond to anything else. And that was the point where he realised that it was very serious stalking, because even though she wasn't responding, he was just trying everything he could.
There's 5 different types of stalker. The most prolific and the most dangerous is the type of stalker that starts following somebody or upsetting somebody after the breakup of a relationship.
The sheer volume of messages that he sent to her, she found very overwhelming and uncomfortable with. Her phone would just go berserk. He would flip from emotionally blackmailing her and saying that he couldn't live without her and he wouldn't let her do this and this wasn't okay, to then sending her a nice message as if they had made up and they were back in a relationship, saying, oh, don't make plans for this weekend, I'm coming down, I've got plans for us, as if it was completely normal. She had not replied to a single message. It was literally just him talking to himself.
He was messaging her from his phone, and when she blocked his phone, he'd message her from other phones. One of the serious things that was when he hacked into her Facebook account.
Alice came to me when she knew her Facebook had been hacked and she could see that the email address and the ownership of the account had been changed. She was quite concerned about that. In the end, she deleted the account and created a new one.
In the midst of all this, Alice decided to get away and visit her sister Emma, a serving army officer in Germany.
While she was out there, she met one of Emma's friends and they started a relationship.
She had the absolute best time, and it was the first time since everything had happened that I had kind of seen the old Alice coming back, and she felt a lot better about it. She had met a guy and he seemed like a really, really nice guy. She hadn't forgotten about Harry, but she was a lot closer to forgetting about him, which is exactly where she needed to be.
But Alice's newfound happiness was short-lived.
She kept it all off Facebook because she was convinced that had been hacked, and she didn't want Harry to know or do anything weird. Harry found out and started messaging him.
I believe he had some sort of a spyware to see exactly what she was doing, because he knew where she was, what she was doing, and who she was with, and more importantly, who she was speaking to.
Harry sent Alice's new boyfriend messages saying she was being unfaithful. Fortunately, they weren't taken seriously, and the relationship continued to blossom.
For Harry Dillon, this was evidence that Alice was really not going to come back to him.
It wasn't just your typical boyfriend struggling to detach themselves from you. This was next level stalking and harassment. And that's at the point where I just had a feeling that it was going to hurt her. And I think she knew too.
Coming up, Harry's reign of terror worsens.
He'd said, I don't want to kill you. I wouldn't ever kill you. I don't know why you think I'd kill you.
He wanted her to be scared at that point, and it worked. Alice was petrified.
It had been several months since Alice Ruggles had ended her short-lived romance with Harry Dillon. After being beaten down by his controlling and mentally abusive behavior, the final straw was a revelation that he'd been cheating throughout their relationship. Now Harry had started a terrifying campaign of stalking, constantly hounding Alice with messages, hacking her social media, and even threatening to release intimate photos. And it was becoming very clear that he wasn't going to stop anytime soon. Harry's discovery that Alice had met a new man saw his stalking behavior step up a gear.
At that point, he sees that there's going to be very little opportunity of a route back to her, and that sparks the anger that he feels. So from just being somebody who's voyeuristically watching her world, now he needs to physically arrive back in it to let her know that he's not going to accept her behaviour.
And things took a terrifying turn for Alice on the night of the 30th September, which led her finally to call the police.
Hi there, I split up with my boyfriend about 3 months ago. Since then, I know that he's hacked into my Facebook and also my phone. He's been sending me a lot of messages even though I've asked him not to contact me. And tonight he sent me a message saying I've been in the garden since 5. I had a knock at my door, and then when I went there was no one there, and then it happened again 2 or 3 times. And then he's come round the back, knocked on my bedroom window. He's been outside and he's like left some flowers and chocolates on the outside windowsill, and he walked off. He's not done anything, but I'm concerned. I just feel a bit shaken up tonight.
How much time did it take him to deliver a bunch of flowers to Alice's house? 5 hours just to leave a bunch of flowers. Has this actually turned into a part-time or full-time job for him? That's how we should be measuring how dangerous a stalker is.
As he was driving back up to Edinburgh, he then left a couple of phone messages.
Hey Alice, after we spoke and you didn't want to speak, well, you didn't want to call me again, so that's why I decided to come down to give you flowers and chocolates. But I know you're not going to come out in front of me and speak to me, so that's why I left it there.
Harry's next message, for which there is no recording, was to be a lot more sinister.
He'd said, I don't want to kill you. I wouldn't ever kill you. I don't know why you think I'd kill you.
When I heard the voicemail the day after, it made me shudder. For how many times he says that he wasn't going to kill her. It was a veiled threat. It had to be. He knew what he was doing. He wanted her to be scared at that point. And it worked. Alice was petrified.
The stalking turned into a punishment for her leaving him. He was not going to let her get away with rejecting him. He couldn't deal with it.
There's a number of things you can do.
Yeah.
You can go to a solicitor and take out an injunction.
Yeah.
Keep them away from you.
Yeah.
Or report it directly to the police now, and we can issue them the PIN notice, which means if he ever comes near you again or contacts you again, he'll be arrested.
Okay.
So which would you prefer?
Can I try that option, please?
Yeah, of course you can.
At his army barracks, Harry was served with a police information notice, warning him not to communicate with Alice again. Otherwise, he would be arrested.
She felt comforted by that. And so for the next few days, she was back at work and she was getting back her spirits and she began to be the bubbly girl that people had known.
It was a sense of achievement that she felt, that so many people have been telling me to do this for so long and I've finally done it. She felt proud of herself and some sense of safety, knowing that someone was listening to her and taking her seriously.
This feeling of safety was, however, fleeting.
A week later, a parcel arrives from him, which is in direct breach of the PIN. It was a few things of hers he was sending back, together with a note saying, I know you've called the police on me, and I'm not going to contact you again. She actually phones the police the second time, and she explains that the PIN's been breached. And then the officer said, well, what do you want us to do about it? Arrest him? If that's really what was said, then that's beyond belief, because the police may have a duty to listen to the victim and what the victim wants, but they can't put the onus on the victim. The police have to be the experts.
I said to her, the police don't think it's an issue. Otherwise, they would be doing something about this. So you're just going to have to put up with it. If you just keep ignoring him, he will eventually go away. Because I believe that would be the case. And I didn't want her to have no hope. Within about 10 minutes, her sister rang me and said, Mum, you can't tell her that. He's going to kill her. I know he's going to kill her. That's what stalkers do.
Five days later, on the 12th of October 2016, Alice was caught on CCTV camera leaving work.
Alice had left work about 5 o'clock. I was due to leave work about 6 o'clock. I was due to go to my partner's to stay that night. I had left my mobile phone in the flat by mistake, so Alice had known that I was going to take a pit stop at the flat.
A colleague had offered Alice a ride home, and she was caught on a neighbour's dash cam being dropped off at her flat at 5:31 p.m. She then conversed with friends on social media and even posted a photo trying on a new dress. Just over an hour later, Maxine arrived home.
My key wouldn't work because I had asked Alice, being in the flat on her own, to keep the security snib on. I then started trying to scream through the letterbox her name, just Alice, Alice, it's me, can you let me in? Nothing. The place was eerie and it was so silent. You could hear a pin drop, and at that point I started panicking. Something come over me to run to the back of my property. The first thing I noticed was the window of the living room was open, as if someone had climbed through it. Panic just set in. I headed straight to my bedroom to get my mobile phone to dial Alice. When I left my bedroom, that's when I noticed Alice lying on the bathroom floor. And I just ran to her. I remember thinking that she'd fell and hurt herself, or she'd cut herself on something. And then I just knew what had happened to her. I knew she'd been attacked. We're trying to describe that scene. I can't put into words because it's nothing I've ever seen in a film, never mind real life.
Maxine made a frantic 999 call.
Please, I've just come back to my flat and the door was locked, so I crawled through the window and my flatmate's covered in blood in the bathroom.
Is she breathing?
I don't know, I can't look, I'm sorry.
Okay, try and stay calm.
Alice! 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 Oh my God, she's dead! She's dead!
Where's the blood from?
It's everywhere, she's covered in blood, she's blue. An absolute psychopath.
Say that again, sorry. She put in a complaint at her ex and she phoned 101 at the weekend to report that he started in contact and says we're going to do nothing. Now this has happened.
What's he called?
Harry Dillon.
Harry.
Dillon. I think it's definitely him.
Until I heard my phone call again, I didn't even remember giving the police his name. But at the time, the strength that had just come over me, I knew what I had to do.
The paramedics arrived, but it was too late to save Alice. There was no chance of survival. It wasn't long before the police were at the scene.
And a bit of blood there, look.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of blood here on the floor.
And thanks to Maxine, they immediately had a suspect.
She's lying on her back in the bathroom with a very large hole in her neck.
There was no doubting that this was the work of Harry Dillon.
Right, it's murder.
It is, John.
Yeah.
I knew that there was nothing that could have helped Alice. I just needed them to get to him.
A warrant was immediately made for Dillon's arrest, and later that same night, he was picked up at his army barracks near Edinburgh.
This is arresting Truman Dillon on suspicion of the murder of Alice Ruggles.
Are you saying that Alice is dead, or is she, or someone's
All I can tell you is that you've been arrested on suspicion of the murder of Alice Ruggles. Have you got anything in your pockets at all?
No, have a look.
I just want to take off your Help for Heroes bracelet you've got on, please.
It was important that the arresting officers preserved any forensic evidence that might have been on Harry Dillon. His car was also seized for examination. And on his arrival at the police station in Newcastle, booking officers made note of his physical appearance.
Can you just have a look at your wrists, please? Right, okay, and then just looking at you've got a bit of
2 scratches.
Right.
Harry had 2 distinct scratches on his cheek, which looked like the sign of a struggle. And now in custody, the police took his clothing and carried out further forensic tests, which included taking swabs, blood samples and nail scrapings. The police also had the difficult task of telling Alice's parents what had happened.
It's actually 2 o'clock in the morning, and I suddenly became aware of someone knocking on the front door.
We sat down and the policewoman was quite direct. Your daughter Alice has been murdered. And I just remember feeling that the blood just drained from the whole of my body.
Sue and me both immediately knew who it was, so we said, "Is it Harry Dillon?"
It could not have been anybody else who killed Alice.
Coming up, the horrific circumstances of Alice's death are revealed.
I remember all of the detail, and it was horrific. It's horror movie stuff.
She tried to get away from it, and he never allowed it. He was going to make sure that she died.
On the 12th of October 2016, 24-year-old Alice Ruggles was found dead in her bathroom, having had her throat slit. There was only one prime suspect in mind, and that was her ex-boyfriend, Harry Dillon. Following their breakup, Dillon had started stalking Alice, and his sinister behavior worsened on discovering she had embarked on a new relationship. Now, Alice was dead, and it was a job of the police to find enough evidence to prove that Harry was her killer. With Harry Dillon in custody, the police needed to get his version of events. He was taken for interview.
So, Harry, did you murder Alice?
No, I did not murder Alice.
Were you present when this murder occurred?
No, I wasn't.
Can you tell me what you were doing yesterday then, from 10 a.m. until the time you were arrested last night, please?
I drove down towards Newcastle. I drove down to speak to her.
No arrangement whatsoever for you to be there?
No.
How do you end up in the house?
I never entered inside her house.
Right.
I was always outside.
Harry freely admitted that he had gone to Alice's flat and found her messaging on her phone.
She said, I don't want to speak to you or see you because I've heard stories about how guys like you end up killing their girlfriends. And I've got a feeling you'll probably do the same, and I don't want to die, I want to live. She just had her arms like this with her phone in one of her hands.
Yeah.
So I was like, Alice, please, and as soon as I did that, just holding her arms with her right hand, she just pulled it off and just went like, you creep.
Harry came up with an excuse to explain away the scratches on his face.
If you imagine that you're responsible for having violently murdered somebody, you would also think it made sense that your behaviour would be a little bit erratic, potentially anxious, certainly not completely normal. But actually, Harry appears, to all intents and purposes, completely normal. He appears completely relaxed. He doesn't seem to have anything to hide. And that says something very clearly. It says that in his conscience, killing her does not really have any meaning.
The whereabouts of Alice's phone was crucial to the investigation. It hadn't been found at the scene, and the police believed Harry could have taken it.
What happened to that phone? Do you remember?
Do you remember what happened? Like, what do you mean?
Her phone?
Yeah, what happened with her phone?
The only thing I can think of is that it had incriminating information on it. I don't know if maybe she filmed him when he got there, or maybe he knew he'd left spyware on the phone itself and that he was going to get it because he knew that would be used as evidence. There was definitely something on there that he didn't want the world to see.
But he claimed Alice had her phone. With Harry denying any involvement in Alice's murder, the police had to prove he was responsible, and it wasn't long before they had a breakthrough. At the time Alice was dropped off outside her home, CCTV showed Harry Dillon's white BMW parked up the street, hidden from view. 14 minutes later, Harry could be seen driving towards Alice's flat and parking up outside. Shortly after, CCTV showed Harry's car leaving the area, and within minutes, Maxine returned home to find Alice dead.
Harry simply wants to kill Alice because she dared to hurt him, as far as he's concerned. He's not thinking about next week, next year, the rest of his life, because the rage that consumes him, the need to bring back a sense of control by extinguishing her life, that's the driver.
Despite not being able to find Alice's mobile, police had been able to seize her phone records. And another major turning point in the investigation came when they discovered her phone had hit masts along the route Harry travelled back to his barracks. It was time to put their newfound evidence to Harry and challenge his earlier lies.
Can you remember that you saw Alice's phone in her hand when you left?
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to change your mind, do you?
No.
Before we show you this?
It was... because...
I'm going to show you something that will suggest otherwise.
It was... so... Can I speak to my solicitor first, and then I'll speak to you?
Harry was a little less forthcoming during this interview.
What I'm saying to you is, you have taken Alice's phone. What have you got to say about that?
No comment.
The police now had enough evidence to charge Harry Dillon with Alice's murder.
You're charged with that on Wednesday the 12th of October 2016 at Gateshead, murdered Alice Ruggles, contrary to common law. Do you have any reply to that charge?
And the evidence kept on coming. Alice's blood was found on the wristband police had confiscated during Harry's arrest. And her blood had also been found on the steering wheel of his car. The police were now building a strong case, as Harry was heading to court for a full trial. This took place in April 2017.
Originally, people said he'll probably plead guilty and there won't be a trial. And in a way, we were sort of quite glad that there was going to be a trial, because we felt it would be something where he could face up to what he'd done and realise that it was wrong. But he used the trial to prolong his control over us, and he was putting in horrible jibes about Emma and Clive all the way through the trial that were just designed to make us feel bad.
The hate that I felt for him throughout that trial was like nothing I've ever felt in my life. I couldn't take my eyes off him, just staring at him and wanting him, wishing him to look at me. Never man enough to look at any of us in the eye after what he'd done. Just sat there, no remorse, no emotion from him whatsoever. Just cold.
The first point that the prosecuting barrister made was, well, you don't seem to be very upset about this.
By now, Harry had changed his story once more. In an attempt to explain the forensic findings against him, Harry admitted he was present when Alice sustained her injuries. but claimed they were caused by a combination of self-defense and accident. He said he'd tried to restrain her when she came at him with a knife, and it ended up lodged in her neck, but none of this was consistent with the pathologist's findings.
I remember all of the detail, and it was horrific. There was defensive wounds on Alice's hands. There was a knife injury under the nose. There was bruising on her back, so what he'd done is he'd pinned her down and cut her throat.
Police had discovered that 2 days prior to Alice's murder, Harry had travelled to her flat and taken a photo of the rear window. On the night of the 12th of October, Harry had climbed through the flat window, armed himself with a knife from the kitchen, and whilst Alice had tried to lock herself in the bathroom, he kicked the door open. She tried to defend herself, but ended up on the floor when Harry killed her.
Alice wouldn't have died straight away, and she was in massive agony. It's just really, really horrible.
That's what I struggle with the most, is the level of violence that he gave to Alice in her last minutes of her life, and the fact that she knew it was happening to her and she tried to get away from it. And he never allowed it. He was going to make sure that she died.
Shockingly, just before he had killed Alice, Harry had been messaging a girl on a dating site to arrange a meeting later that evening. The court also heard that this wasn't the first time that Harry had harassed an ex-girlfriend.
A couple of years before he met Alice, he had been going out with a girl in Kent. And when she finished with him, he had threatened her, and a restraining order had been placed by the police against him.
With such compelling evidence, it didn't take long for the jury to find Harry Dillon guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 22 years.
It was a relief that he'd been sentenced, but it seemed like too short a time. I have two worries about it. One, that he could do the same thing to somebody else, and that he's never ever accepted what he's done, so he doesn't even know it's wrong.
I still think he would be a danger to people, and I would do everything in my power to make sure that he cannot come out after that time.
Now, through the Alice Ruggles Trust and other support services, Alice's family and friends are working to highlight the dangers of stalking, to ensure that people recognise it and report it at the earliest stages, so that no one else suffers the same fate as Alice.
We, as a charity, need to be helping people recognise, before it's getting too late, how serious stalking is, so that people actually go to the help that is out there, the stalking helpline, other charities, or to the police much, much sooner than Alice did.
The way the police dealt with Alice's calls has also been the subject of an investigation, and now extra training has been implemented to ensure they know how to deal with stalking.
Various police forces are putting together training packages. We're helping with some of those. Telling a personal story really empowers the trainers to get people's attention.
It's really important that the police know you're in danger, and then the people who are stalking are properly dealt with and charged with stalking and imprisoned if necessary. There's also a call to make the register of stalkers, like the sex offenders register. I think that's a massively important thing as well, because people who stalk tend to stalk again. It is something that will end in tragedy eventually.
If others can realise the dangers of stalking through Alice's story, then hopefully no more lives will be tragically lost.
It's important that we remember the fun person that she was. She was the one who always made people feel better.
She was very special. I think some people just have that thing about them. You could just talk to her about anything. She was just a very easy person to get along with.
I want Alice to be remembered for her life and her personality and that sassiness that she brought to the table. And Alice had such an appetite for life. She was infectious. She was absolutely infectious. Yes, people are going to know how she died, but I want people to know Alice's name about how to get out of that and perhaps to keep yourself alive.
A new stalking bill is currently making its way through Parliament. This bill will give the police more powers and the authority to issue stalking protection orders, which, unlike PINs, will allow the police to restrict the actions of those accused whilst they gather more evidence.